We're going to be getting started in just a minute or so. We have a few more people to let in from the waiting room. Jess, are we good to go?
I have let those people who were in the waiting room into the meeting, so they have joined, and then I'll keep an eye on the waiting room and let anyone else in who would like to join.
Great. Well, thank you. And good morning, everybody. Happy Earth Week. Every day is Earth Day at the Student Conservation Association, but we're happy to have this opportunity today to talk with you about youth attitudes on the environment, environmental justice, climate, and a number of other topics today. And we really appreciate you joining us. My name is Stephanie Meeks. I'm the CEO and president of the Student Conservation Association. And I'm very pleased today to be joined by colleagues who will be helping me share the results of this survey today, including our board chair, Dr. Mamie Parker. She's a retired U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service executive. Melanie Areola, an active SCA Sustainability Fellow with the City of Pittsburgh, and Michael Cronin, who's the program manager of the Environmental Defense Fund's Climate Corps. So thank you all very much for being with us today. The Student Conservation Association has been a leader in youth service and environmental stewardship for more than 60 years. Our programs provide young people with transformative, hands-on service opportunities, and many of our 100,000 alumni credit SCA with setting them on a path, on a career path in conservation. In fact, as many as 70% of our alumni are studying or working in the field of conservation, just like Melanie and Michael, who are joining us today. Our mission in doing this work is to develop the next generation of conservation leaders in the US, and we're committed to ensuring that that pipeline of leadership is as diverse as the US is today and as it's likely to become over in the coming years. In addition to providing active service opportunities, we seek to amplify the voice of youth, especially as they pertain to pressing environmental issues of our time. We call this co-powering, working with America's youth to provide them with the tools and the platform that they need to activate their own ambitions as they relate to conservation. The SCA Climate Survey, which we'll talk about today, is just one tool to help achieve that aim. And before we jump into the survey results themselves, I'd like to ask my colleague Cecilia Ailman to put the link to our landing page for the survey in the chat function. It is thesca.org/climate survey, and you'll find there links to the survey results and several other resources analyzing what the results tell us. But let's jump in now. The climate survey is an independent poll reflecting the beliefs of more than 1,000 young Americans from the ages of 15 to 25. They were randomly selected from across the country. The margin of error for the survey is 3%, and the poll was conducted in the latter part of March of this calendar year. Our goal in fielding this survey was to formally gauge and amplify youth voices on climate and other pertinent conservation issues of our day. And what we discovered is a great deal of concern among young Americans about our present climate course and ample anxiety over how young people can contribute to a course correction. Let's take a quick look at some of our initial findings. As you'll see, a wide majority of young people, 86%, believe that our climate is changing. Nearly 2 in 5 consider the situation a crisis, and those top two categories combined represent nearly 70% of respondents. I think we have the wrong slides up. If we can start those again. But young Americans are significantly split on whether we still have time to address the worst impacts of climate warming. And I think this is one of the most important findings, or at least for me, one of the most significant findings coming out of the survey. 86% of young Americans believe that the climate is changing, but they felt very fractured about what they can actually do. It really transitions from if to how, with more than 80% pointing to technology as the ultimate climate solution. And I guess that shouldn't come as a real surprise. I myself have three young people, three sons who fall in this age demographic of 15 to 25. And I know that technology is never very far away from their fingertips. So it's not a surprise at all that they would point to technology as the ultimate solution. But 71% of respondents also say that our climate is changing as the result of human influence. So again, human innovation isn't much of a stretch when identifying the solutions. But in contrast, only 4% cite legislative reform as an answer. And that survey response surely reflects, to me anyway, a lack of faith in government's ability to unite behind a common strategy, as we've seen over the past several years. To a degree, these figures carry into some other areas as well. We wanted to determine what actions young Americans are taking to lighten their respective footprint and help mitigate climate impacts. We found that while 2/3 of respondents avidly share climate information across their social media platforms, the next most prevalent response was reducing their reliance on single-use plastics. 27% of them said that they're taking that action. Other actions, such as taking alternate transportation, reducing electrical use, and even engaging in protests, all fall within the 10 to 15% range. If we could put up the slide, it was telling when we asked respondents to identify with one of these 4 statements. More than 1/3 said they want to take action but are not sure how. Another 1/3 seemed daunted by the scale of climate change, though they still wanted to take action. Of the 15% who are fine with the idea of there being little they can do, 45%, or almost half, do not believe that the climate is changing. And 14% are confident that their personal responses are already making a difference. These are somewhat sobering figures, I think. We'd like to see everyone, individuals, corporations, governments, and others, all feel that they're taking an active role in addressing climate change. And we see at least a couple of factors in play in those results. We conducted a similar survey last year in 2020 in late February, and we received the results just as the coronavirus pandemic was starting to tighten its grip on the country and on the world. The pandemic forced us to postpone a conference that we were planning for last summer, a convening on youth co-powerment, at which we intended to release the results of our survey. And we thought it would be interesting to contrast some of this year's results with last year's, because even in that short period of time, there have been some notable differences. There's a PDF posted to our website, which we shared a minute ago, which includes last year's figures where applicable, and you'll see some slippage against this year's numbers. For example, belief in climate change overall decreased from 92% last year to 86%. And those who say that climate change is human generated declined from 83% to 71%. We believe that some of that change is attributable to COVID. The pandemic has certainly cast a shadow, or worse than a shadow, on everyone over the past year. And plus, it's been a particularly challenging time for young people to manage and focus amid this enormous cloud. But perhaps even more importantly is our political environment. The ramp up to the 2020 election was marked by division and disinformation, and sadly, this has eroded truth for many and fostered a sense of insecurity and helplessness on climate. Here's further evidence of the politicization of climate change. Our survey shows that climate change is a fact for 86% of respondents, and no matter how you split it, male, female, white, black, brown, east versus west, the numbers are largely consistent. The only difference is among ideologies. 93% of people self-identifying as liberals say that our climate is changing. 92% of moderates agree. Among conservatives, that number falls to 73%. We don't see this drop off in areas such as environmental justice, which we'll go to in just a few minutes. Another number that jumps out is the 89% who say they get the majority of their information from social media. We intuitively may have presumed this, but that 89% figure underscores the need for those of us seeking to address climate change and support among rising leaders, and that we need to meet these young Americans where they are by giving them more information, more objective information to aid their decision-making and meaningful opportunities to enhance the world and with it their futures. I now want to hand things off to Dr. Mamie Parker for another look at the climate survey, and that is the area of environmental justice. Mamie?
Thank you so much, Stephanie, and thank you for your leadership at SCA and staff in doing this wonderful job in gathering this data, which I think is really revealing and can certainly be helpful as we move the organization ahead. I go back and think about, on a personal note, my mother was an avid angler and an outdoor woman that took me outdoors with her. And because of that, I have the desires now to see and feel that we have a system that's better than it was and is right now. And it's amazing because not only did she teach me something, but in the 9th grade, I heard Marvin Gaye's song, Mercy, Mercy Me. And he talked about things are not like they used to be. And he talked about the blue skies and the mercury and the fish that we eat and in our ocean. And so as I look at these numbers here today, I am reminded of that, which is a reason why I was inspired to become also a board member of SCA, because I think many of the answers are and will be solved, the problems will be solved by the youth of today, members of the Student Conservation Association. And so when I think about this particular survey here, I go back and we look at 2 issues of climate change and the disproportionate impact on communities of color and those in lower socioeconomic communities. And of course, the growing recognition of systemic racism in this country and discrimination, and the issues of environmental justice and environmentalism and how they've come together. And so it's the right time in America. This is the new chapter in America as we wrestle with how do we address these issues? How do we hear the voices of the youth as they tell us what's going on? How do we amplify that voice and become an advocate for them? So let's look at some of the numbers here that we have. While there are evidence in the survey that young people may not be overly familiar with the term environmental justice, they are absolutely aware of the inequities that exist in our society. And I talked about my mother earlier, and one of the things that she always said, when all is said and done, sometimes more is said than done. And what we see here is that the youth, and in this survey, they want to see something done. 67% of them believe that the US citizens lack equal protection from exposure to pollutants and other hazards. The next slide will tell you too that, and while they do that, 71%, let's break it down even further, 71% of the liberals, 68% of the moderates, and 65% of the conservatives, again, they believe that there are some impacts there and that we should look for ways to do something about it. Okay, so the next slide will talk about the fact that, you know, as I said earlier, one thing I want to mention when you look at that previous slide is that whether it's liberals, whether it's moderates, or whether we're talking about the conservative, we have to come to the conclusion that this is a nonpartisan issue. And therefore, with the right mediation and the right people coming to the table, we can certainly see ways in which we can make some headways in improving these points here. So in this slide, it tells us that environmental justice, it describes environmental justice in the United States. 37%, about 1/3 call it extremely inequitable. Another third say it could use some improvement, while 18% replied generally good, and 5% said it's very, very strong. Okay, so the next slide, you'll see that in the next slide, you know, just thinking about the survey itself and what it means, the figures seem to indicate that environmental justice, again, as I said, has not become politicized, that it's an issue that's important to us. And when we see a combine of 70% of respondents say environmental justice is lacking in our country, again, that we need to do something about it, we can only speculate that this is because of what happened in 2020. We are starting in June, what I call Justice June in 2020, whether it was in Minneapolis, whether it was in Chicago or other parts of this country where we saw people speak out on the issue. We have to believe that these numbers are related to that. But again, I mentioned a new chapter in America. So when we think about the environmental justice movement and what it means, we know that the president has put together an executive order that addresses this. And so we can get to that by understanding that 77% approve of the president's goal of achieving 100% clean energy economy, and that they want to see a net zero by 2050. Objectives that have direct environmental justice implications. 69% support the White House executive order, incorporating environmental justice into the mission of all the federal departments. And this one is really near and dear to my heart. I had the opportunity to spend over 30 years at the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and still do a lot of work with them as the head of fisheries in this country. I've seen some of these situations, and also as the National Environmental Policy Act, or the NEPA person that was in charge of making sure that we brought in communities and worked with communities to look for ways to include them at the table. That was not the case. There was certainly a lack there in that information. And so to see that 69% of the youth that we've surveyed, they favor incorporating environmental justice in the mission of these federal agencies, not just the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the Department of the Interior, but also the Forest Service, the Fish and Wildlife Service, the National Park Service, and all the natural resource agencies will, of course, I know for a fact that they are working on this now, and this just warms my heart. 26% disagree. 5% are still undecided. So the next slide, let's see if we have, in terms of public policy, 57% agree with the US decision to rejoin the Paris Climate Agreement. And again, over half of the individuals we surveyed agreed to that, while 27% disagree and 16% are undecided. So that's a large percentage of those that are happy to see that the US is now in the position to move ahead and will become a leader again in addressing climate change in this country. 61% support the proposed civilian climate corps designed to employ Americans in addressing climate change, biodiversity, and conservation. 61%. That number again is very, very high compared to those that do not support it, even those that are undecided, 61%. And I'm sure this has a lot to do with bringing jobs back to our communities. And we are at SCA are interested in not only bringing jobs to our urban communities, but also to our rural communities as well. And so this number and this Civilian Climate Corps, I'm sure is going to be similar to the one that we had before, that was back in the 1940s, that will make a difference in our country. 61% support the Civilian Climate Corps. It is worth noting that the participants engaged in these and related resilient building projects in communities and parks all across the nation every day. At SCA and other corps, they stand together and ready to advance the Biden administration climate and job objectives to help our country move forward away from the damaging economic effects of the pandemic, as well as to a healthier and future planet. So now I'll give it back to Stephanie, and she will give us some more information that's valuable.
Dr. Parker, thank you very much. We're so fortunate to have you on the board and chairing the board of the Student Conservation Association. We're very grateful to you for being here today and sharing your experience at the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. We'll now have the opportunity to hear from two SCA members. The first is Melanie Areola. Melanie is currently engaged as an SCA participant with the city of Pittsburgh, and she's going to talk a little bit today about her personal passion for sustainability and her reactions to these survey results. Melanie, thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, Stephanie, and good morning, everyone. Like you said, my name is Melanie. I am currently completing my second term as an SCA Fellow at the Department of City Planning in the Division of Sustainability and Resilience at the City of Pittsburgh. And I'm happy to give my input today as a member of, I guess, the younger generation that's represented by the survey. So currently as an SCA Fellow, I've had the pleasure of working on various exciting sustainability projects with the City of Pittsburgh. So far, my main project has been working on an adaptation narrative that is building upon the city's ongoing climate action plan. So basically, instead of focusing on emission reduction, I've been focusing on building the city's resilience. So that means analyzing climate risks that the city has already been experiencing, like flooding, landslides, air quality events, and understanding the risks that are already happening, assessing vulnerabilities, and identifying areas of opportunity to prepare proactively to mitigate some of these disasters. I've also been able to work on the sustainability dashboard, which when launched, it will be able to show the community and the city internally to track some of the progress that it's already been seeing towards its climate action goals, and also identify ways to measure and improve on those existing goals. So I'm really grateful that the SCA has been able to expand my personal values and sustainability through this fellowship that I'm currently on. So I actually grew up in Los Angeles, which is a very urban environment. In fact, I wasn't very much exposed to the environment growing up. In fact, I grew up about less than a mile away from the Inglewood oil field, which is the second most productive oil field in Los Angeles. So I really was not, didn't have many environmental, I didn't feel connected to the environment. And I rediscovered that environment and nature through a local NGO, and that came to recruit volunteers. And since then, I managed to get my hands dirty and really value access to nature and access to the outdoors. And I think recognizing that importance, especially in an urban environment. And so I sought to have a career that would help promote that and conserve some of the access to those natural spaces. And so I sought a career in sustainability, and this SCA has helped me kind of apply some of those skills that I was learning in school and some of that passion in an actual job right out of school to practice some of those skills. And it's also been an experience, working, I went to school in Pittsburgh, working in Pittsburgh to see kind of the flip side of other climate issues that are going on. So I came from Los Angeles and dealing with wildfires, and now I'm in Pittsburgh dealing with flooding issues and intense rainfall. So it's just more motivation to be continuing working in this field. And the SCA experience has allowed me to do that, while having tangible outcomes and seeing the impact of some of the work. And I'm also excited to be part of the SCA Fellows that have a 15-year tradition in Pittsburgh. So I'm very grateful for that. And also the SCA experience has allowed me to see other previous SCA Fellows, so SCA alumni, to see them in current roles that I might see myself in a couple of years. So I'm happy to share my story, and I hope that I can inspire other SCA Fellows that might be considering a term with the SCA. And again, thanks for having me. I'll pass it back to Stephanie.
Melanie, thank you so much. Really exciting to hear about your work. And as Mamie said, it's up to you and your generation to solve a lot of these problems. So we're glad you're getting a running start and bringing so much value already to the city of Pittsburgh. It's really wonderful to hear that. So Melanie is a current participant with SCA. Michael Cronin is an alum of our programs, and he's currently a program manager with the Environmental Defense Fund's Climate Corps. He'll talk with us a little bit about that work and how SCA brought him to this work in climate as well. Michael, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Stephanie. I really appreciate it. Yeah, I worked as an SCA community crew leader in Washington, D.C. for 4 separate seasons over a couple-year span with SCA. And then I transitioned to leading SCA's volunteer service events as an events coordinator on staff for a couple of years. My experience with SCA definitely cemented my interest in pursuing a career in the environmental movement, specifically with wanting to do something about climate change. And I decided to go the policy route and pursued a master's in environmental policy at George Washington University while I was working full-time at SCA, actually. And that led me to my current job as a project manager for Environmental Defense Fund's Climate Corps program. And that's where I've been since March 2018. Climate Corps is a summer fellowship program in which we match graduate students with companies or organizations to advance sustainability projects. And fellows act essentially as sustainability consultants for their host companies over the summers. And I work specifically to mobilize the 1,000+ alum who've gone through this program, many like the young people who took this SCA survey, to take action as climate advocates. And I think there's a strong appetite among young people to get active as advocates, but they don't necessarily know where to start. Which I think is a sentiment reflected in this survey. And that's where I come in to provide the training and the resources for them to get started as advocates. And in our trainings, we teach them various tactics to influence lawmakers, but most importantly, we teach them how to build relationships with lawmakers, make personal connections through telling their stories. I think it's so important for young people to get involved in advocacy because the clock is ticking. Based on the Paris Agreement goals alone, we know we need to get to net zero emissions by 2050. I think the business and tech communities are definitely taking the lead on addressing climate change while government is lagging sorely behind. We know in the US, we need far more aggressive, bolder climate policies to be passed at every level of government to meet the urgency of the moment, and definitely optimistic with the new administration. I'd say based on the results of the survey, I think you see a lot of young people who realize climate change is a problem, but they're pretty jaded and not super confident in our leaders or politicians to fix it. I think about that 4% were confident in legislative reform figure. And who can blame them? The science has been clear on climate change for decades, and we've yet to pass major legislation to address it. And not only are they not confident in their politicians to address climate change, but they're not confident in themselves to make a difference. I think this is a critical point that needs to be addressed based on the survey. I believe it's because climate change is such a macro, large-scale problem that people sometimes fall into this trap that They don't believe their actions as an individual can really make a difference. And I'm here to say that's a fallacy. Just look at an advocate like Greta Thunberg, a teenage girl, has quite literally changed the world by mobilizing millions of climate advocates on a global scale. However, I understand the feeling of helplessness and the weight of the issue of climate change itself for young people. Climate anxiety is a real thing. And I understand it can be tough to determine where to begin and to be told, hey, you young people are going to come up with the solutions to this problem. That's really tough to accept that responsibility. I think to combat this, young people should consider joining a coalition or an advocacy group. In advocacy, I think the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. And especially if you're just getting started as an advocate, it can be intimidating as an individual. So join a group of like-minded folks that are equipped with the resources to support you as an advocate, and you'll feel much more comfortable. I know SCA did that for me, being part of just a group of like-minded environmental advocates, and that launched my career. And last thing I say is you don't need to be an expert to influence lawmakers. You just need to connect with them on a personal level as constituents and tell your story. They work for you, not the other way around. That's what I'll say so far.
That's great, Michael. Thank you, and really appreciate what you're doing at the Environmental Defense Fund to give more people that first start in becoming a climate advocate along the lines of what you were just describing. So that concludes our overview of the survey results. We'd be pleased to engage in a discussion and answer any questions that people might have. And before we do that, I might ask Cecilia to put the link to our website in the chat function again, www.thesca.org/climate survey for the survey results and from some analysis that we have done in anticipation of sharing that with everyone today. And I'll ask Jess to let me know if there are any questions or if anyone's raising their hand. I'm sorry, I was supposed to say that. If you'd like to raise your hand, you can use the reaction button down at the bottom of the screen in Zoom to raise your hand. And we'll be happy to call on you and unmute your microphone. Going once, going twice. Well, we very much appreciate you all being with us today to share these results. Our presentation today is being live streamed on Facebook, and it will be there for others to view and to take a look at over time. We think that there's a lot of really good information in these results. And I say for me personally, I think this survey is a wake-up call for every conservation organization, and especially for organizations like the Student Conservation Association who work directly with young people. As Michael just said so eloquently, what this survey says loudly and clearly is that young people believe the climate is changing. They want to do their part, but they're not sure that they know what to do. And we see it certainly as our responsibility to help amplify youth voices and to provide the tools and the resources for youth to begin to engage on with those impulses and to take the actions that they know are required in order to have a more sustainable future for themselves. So thank you again. We look forward to hearing any questions that you might have. Please feel free to share those with us, and we'd be happy to answer them as we can. And I'd like to thank again Dr. Mamie Parker, the chairman of the board of the Student Conservation Association, Melanie Areola, and Michael Cronin for joining me today. Thank you all very much.